What you've heard about Norma is true. She's one of the best stunners coming into 3.0, but that's not just because she's one of the first releases in this version. To be clear, Norma kind of has it all. A 30% stun multiplier, 2-second stun duration increase, she deals extra days when enemies aren't stunned, gains massive attack through her agent level and sheer force stat, which makes her a pretty good pseudo DPS too, but with so many benefits to Norma, today I'll be breaking down everything you need to know about her best teams, her best partners, and why these buffs actually make her such a valuable part to so many of these lineups. As a reminder, today's video will feature footage from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed or learned something from today's video, and without further ado, let's get straight into it. Norma's gameplay revolves around generating her unique resource, just like literally everyone else in the game. She does this primarily though through her EX special and other supporting mechanics in her kit. Once she has enough though, she can use her held basic attack to trigger a backward quick assist to the previous agent, which we'll break down further later in her kit section. What makes Norma especially unique though is her ability to convert said quick assist to a chain attack, which does offer her special synergy with characters like Evelyn and Pyrois, who actually use chain attacks more often or gain value from using them. To understand how her kit actually works though, let's start by quickly breaking down her skills. Before we go further though, as a reminder, I'll be breaking down each skill a bit further in the guide for Norma upon their banner's release though. To start, Norma's special resource is called Preheated Chamber. She begins combat with a portion of it already filled, but can generate more of it throughout her kit. Once she has enough of this resource though, it can then be used to enable her special mechanic, activating a teammate's chain attack through a backward quick assist that gets converted and transformed into a chain. Norma's core passive increases her crit damage and days once she reaches a certain amount of crit rate, but she also gains additional attack based on her sheer force stat, allowing her to deal even more damage when played in a Rupture Team, and also allows her to benefit even when not alongside attack agents. When she has enough Preheated Chamber though, she can then use it to trigger a backward quick assist, as you mentioned earlier, so that you can then use a chain attack. Her additional ability activates when paired with an attack or rupture agent or another member of the ESD faction, and to be clear, this is also why Norma isn't just for someone specifically like Pyrois, but actually can be considered for the likes of Yixuan, Ben Yue, and more. That said, when activated, whenever Norma or her Bangbu attacks, they apply a stackable buff that increases their stun damage multiplier while also extending the duration of an enemy's stun. In addition, using her held EX special grants Norma an attack increase that scales with her agent level, making this a pretty unique buff. To top it all off, however, while channeling her held EX special, all squad members also receive a damage increase, which is always nice. Norma's basic attack is a simple 4-hit fire damage combo, but holding the button in this case will actually allow her to continuously fire before throwing Top Hat Companion onto the field to attack independently. This also stores her current preheated chamber and will also trigger a backward quick assist, which is again what we've touched on a few times at this point. Holding basic attack again though will recall Top Hat Companion, restoring Norma's stored preheated chamber. If Norma leaves the field first though, Top Hat Companion will remain active and continue to support the team on field until it returns automatically. Norma's EX special changes based on the target though. Against non-stunned enemies, it deals increased days, while against stunned enemies, this will instead deal increased fire damage. This also grants preheated chamber and deploys 2 turrets onto field by entering the Enna barrage state. Holding EX special extends the duration of this barrage by consuming energy, and this will also generate additional preheated chamber while the turrets continue firing. Whenever an enemy is stunned or Norma spends preheated chamber on a chain attack though, her turrets enter in enhanced mode, firing more aggressively and changing their attacks again depending on whether the target is stunned. Norma's assist and dodge abilities are fairly straightforward and function much like those of most Zenless agents. They're mostly used of course to evade incoming attack, perform counters, and allow Norma to enter the battlefield safely. No real surprises here. Norma's chain attack is also pretty normal though, as it simply deals massive fire damage. Lastly though, Norma's ultimate calls down a gigantic bomb that explodes for massive fire damage, and upon use, using it will also grant Norma a lot of her preheated chamber. But in total, what she offers as a supportive character on your team is 30% stun damage multiplier, 2-second stun duration increase, personal extra days when enemies aren't stunned, and a pretty massive amount of attack through her agent level and sheer force stat. As for pre-farm materials, you'll need 3,705,000 dennies, 300 senior investigation logs, 25, 75, and 250 of the burn chips of the basic, advanced, and specialized type, 4, 32, and 30 of the basic, advanced, and buster certification seals, 5 hamster cage passes, 9 time-worn husks, and 60 higher dimensional data deep erosion circuits. Now let's talk about what to expect for Norma, their partners, and their teams. But first, as usual, a disclaimer. First, all the results will be shared on my Discord, complete with images that you can scroll through, as again, a single video wouldn't have enough time in order for me to actually cover every lineup and run that I tested. That said, if there's a specific result that you're curious about that isn't shown, feel free to DM me or ping me about it. Second, and as usual, characters with access to potentials will be showcased at P6, as they are otherwise pretty uncompetitive, and also of course they're generally easier and more accessible to obtain compared to Mindscapes. To start, for attack agents, Norma performed amazingly alongside most of the cast, with the standout team being Norma, Suna, and Yaeshun Guang, reaching 39,150 in Shiyu defense and 41,793 in deadly assault. This placed it slightly ahead of Norma, Suna, and Pyrois, which had a 37,784 in Shiyu defense and 40,104 in deadly assault, making Pyrois a very competitive alternative despite being completely free and competing with maybe the most OP agent that Zenless has to offer. Meanwhile, Norma, Suna, and Evelyn trailed behind at 26,051 in Shiyu defense and 30,947 in deadly assault, still performing well, but clearly falling short of the top attack and Rupture style carries, but more on Rupture soon. Overall though, Yaeshun Guang was still the strongest attack-based partner for Norma in these tests, while Pyrois of course was still an extremely impressive budget-friendly option that wasn't too far behind. That said, as a reminder, Evelyn was still pretty good, but the gap between her and the other two options was still very noticeable, especially in Shiyu defense. So yes, though Norma was definitely designed and empowers Pyrois the best at the moment, it's also difficult to ignore the fact that Yaeshun Guang is just that insane, regardless of who the support or stunners are. Now, for Rupture agents, Norma's best partner is clearly Starlight Billy, which yes, is likely just because he's the most recently released Rupture agent and has buffs well made for him, but also because the current bosses suit him well, with Thrall being a mainstay and endgame content for the moment. With this, the lineup of Norma, Lucia, and Starlight Billy achieved an okay 34,000 in Shiyu defense, but a pretty monstrous 46,000 in deadly assault, making it not only the best Rupture team that I tested, but also one of the highest performing teams for Norma overall, competing with Yaeshun Guang, though again, Yaeshun Guang's buffs were definitely not nearly as powerful. Behind Billy though was Norma, Lucia, and Yixuan, reaching a 33,667 in Shiyu defense and a near 41,000 in deadly assault, while Norma, Lucia, and Yidhari also had a 31,500 in Shiyu defense and a 41,307 in deadly assault. Now interestingly though, Yixuan and Yidhari had pretty impressive scores despite the buffs not being directly for them, and though Yidhari did have an advantage with her being ice, Yixuan kind of just brute forced her way through this fight and scored well, synergizing pretty solidly with the extra chain attacks and days from Norma. Overall though, although all three Rupture teams performed very well with Norma, Starlight Billy was clearly ahead at the moment, with everything obviously being in his favor, both in terms of the buff and boss selection. Now, I do also want to take a moment to really highlight that yes, Thrall really is just made for Starlight Billy, as the ability to kill Sobek pretty quickly and also the ability to counter so often does really play into Starlight Billy's favor for him generating additional resources. But again, Yixuan and Yidhari were still pretty good alternatives, but I did also want to highlight that Yixuan being this strong, even without really any tuning or any favoring towards her, is also extremely impressive. Now, looking towards more accessible or beginner options, Norma, Zhao, and Pyrois was easily the strongest free-to-play friendly lineup tested, scoring 30,920 in Shiyu defense and 31,746 in deadly assault. Even without premium supports, Pyrois is continuing to show impressive performances and benefits significantly from Norma's kit, including the buffs of course, the chain attacks, and honestly even the days, which is a lot more impactful than you think. The second best free-to-play option here though was Norma, Lucia, and Monato, which achieved a 20,110 in Shiyu defense and a 22,000 in deadly assault. Now of course, while this was lower than Pyrois and also required Lucia, this was the best and offered the most respectable results for players that were focused on Rupture teams, but I get it, this is a team with two limited agents and one of them is Lucia. However, the alternative to this, with a team like Norma, Penyinhu, and Monato both at M6, actually struggled to get an S rank clear in either Shiyu defense or deadly assault, though of course with more pushing, more resets, or with better gear, this could definitely have resulted in a clear. Lastly though, I wanted to touch on Norma, Lucy, and Pyrois, which scored a near 30,000 in Shiyu defense and again a near 30,000 in deadly assault, making it another pretty solid lineup, especially if Zhao is taken, and this does make it another strong budget setup, especially for players who already have Lucy invested in, or if you decide that Zhao is better suited for a team like Yaeshun Guang. The options are kind of endless here. Overall though, Pyrois once again was the clear winner among the free-to-play options, as both Zhao and Lucy provided solid support for him, while Monato remains a workable and obviously the only real free-to-play Rupture alternative for players who were focusing on non-attack teams. Now, as a final note about Norma, you may be curious about how powerful she is in the context of other stunners, including the likes of Dialyn, and yes, this is definitely a very valid concern for whether Norma is even worth pulling for. Here's what you need to know though. Yes, Dialyn adding a free ultimate to any character on her team is pretty insane, leaning closely to basically being the Void Hunter tier support that we don't otherwise have right now. However, Norma is a special case where yes, for certain characters like Evelyn, she does add close to, if not greater value than someone like Dialyn in certain situations, though this is also dependent on the fight, the weakness of the boss, and so many other factors. With this, though, I found Dialyn and Norma to be close in performance at times, with a roughly 1 to 2,000 score difference in both directions, or outliers where Dialyn is much better and Norma is not, and vice versa. What I actually find to be the most valuable about Norma, though, isn't even her performance compared to Dialyn, but rather what she allows Dialyn to do. Now, if you're someone who's newer to Zenless, you may have approached the game with the mindset of making one really strong team with your favorite agent and then neglecting all other parts of the game and only focusing on this one lineup. However, since Zenless is a title where having many strong teams across the board is very important, this may lead you to encounter some problems later on, especially if your goal is to complete the endgame modes and collect premium currency, as certain fights may favor having Dialyn against both bosses, but surprise, you can only use her once and then she's no longer available. However, with Norma being as strong as she is, and sometimes even outpacing Dialyn depending on the fight or lineup, this is where she actually finds an insane amount of value, freeing up Dialyn so that she can then be paired with Starlight Billy or Yashin Guang, and then using Norma with your Pyros to clear marionettes is a really strong reason to pull for her, and actually something that players who continue to clear endgame will value. No longer are you forced to use your one super shiny first team that can kill the boss, and then settle with the second team that might not even clear and is made of a bunch of scraps. So yes, and though I apologize for the short rant, Norma is pretty strong and helpful, though I personally believe that just comparing her endlessly with Dialyn doesn't really help, especially when you still inevitably need to take additional agents on a second team in order to clear the endgame content. Now let's look at Norma's build options, starting with her W engines. Norma's signature, Chief Sidekick, is easily her best in slot option. It provides 24 crit rate as its main stat, which helps with her core passive scaling, and its passive also grants 30 additional impact, allowing Norma to ignore 15% fire res, and also restores 0.4 energy per second while she's off field. On top of this though, whenever she deals fire damage with an EX special, the entire squad gains a 12.5% damage increase, stacking up to 2 times for a total of 25%. If you're unable to obtain Chief Sidekick though, Yesterday Calls is another great alternative. It provides the same 24% crit main stat, which makes it a pretty strong option to maintain Norma's crit rate requirements, but its passive also grants 1.5 energy per second while she's off field, which again improves her energy generation and helps her access her EX special more frequently. Now, if neither of these options is available though, any engine with a crit rate main stat can also perform well on Norma, and this is because a large portion of her core passive again scales from reaching a specific crit rate threshold, and prioritizing crit rate as a result is definitely one of the most effective ways to actually max her performance. Other options also include things like Hellfire Gear and Steam Oven, both of which can provide valuable impact and energy regen. Hellfire Gear specifically can be obtained through the W Engine exchange shop using 4 W Engine microcontroller units or 240 W Engine chips. This can also be purchased for 600 residual signals, though this really isn't recommended due to the high cost. Meanwhile, it's also worth noting that Steam Oven is completely free, as it can be crafted at the gadget shop, making it definitely one of the most accessible choices for players who do need an engine without spending premium resources that also gives energy regen. For Norma's drive disc setup, King of the Summit is the best in slot option here. Its 4-piece effect grants 15 crit damage whenever she uses an EX special or chain, and again, if Norma's crit rate exceeds 50, which again, considering her core passive, should always be the case, the bonus here is double to 30 crit damage, making it a very synergistic and powerful set for her. Her 2-piece options though are much more flexible. If you need additional stats, Woodpecker Electro is generally the strongest choice, as the additional crit rate helps Norma comfortably reach her required thresholds, but once these crit rate requirements are met, alternatives like Shockstar Disco, Branch and Blade Song, Astro Voice, and even Inferno Metal are all pretty strong options depending on your available pieces, your substats, etc, etc. For main stats, you'll use crit rate on slot 4, fire damage bonus or attack percent on slot 5, and energy regen on slot 6. As for substats, as you'd expect, you'll prioritize crit rate to reach her scaling threshold, and following this, you'll then prioritize crit damage, attack percent, flat attack, and finally flat pen. As for endgame stat goals, you should aim for at least 2000 attack, while simultaneously pushing for both 100 crit rate and as high crit damage as you could really get. That said, for newer or returning players with more limited gear, reaching 1700 attack, 70 crit damage, and 70 crit rate is a perfectly reasonable target and will still allow Norma to provide a pretty decent amount of support to the team, though again, this of course is transitionary or stepping stone gear. Next, let's move to Norma's pros and cons. For pros, she's one of the silliest looking characters I've ever seen, and she has access to a pretty on-demand chain attack, which is useful depending on the character. She also dazes pretty quickly and deals pretty respectable damage even as a stunner, but to add to this, she also pairs pretty well with both Rupture and attack agents. She also does pretty well with Pyrois and is especially good if you're missing Dialyn, and she'll also technically let you free Dialyn if you already have her for other agents on your other teams. As for cons though, there honestly aren't that many fire weak bosses in the game, though you could argue that you don't necessarily need to be element weak to a boss in order to take a stunner, as is the case with someone like Dialyn and Trigger, but she does have real competition in the stunner position with Dialyn if you're considering waiting for a Dialyn rerun in the future maybe, or if you're trying to decide whether she or Dialyn are better against each other. But finally, she also technically doesn't do amazingly with anomaly agents, but really that's not the goal of Norma anyway. Now, as for whether you should pull for Norma, well, this answer really depends on what your goals are in Zenless or what you enjoy playing at the moment. Candidly speaking, there's a lot of anomaly focus at the moment, as Ramiel has been revealed prematurely to pair with other anomaly agents, and well, the current endgame favors Premia, Anomaly, Valina, and Wind in general quite a lot. That said, there are a few things to consider that may help you decide whether she's worth it for your account. If you enjoy playing Pyrois, if you find yourself lacking stunners, or if for whatever reason you wish that you could clone Dialyn multiple times for each of your teams, Norma is likely a very great option for your account. If you're someone who's simply keeping up with and trying to see if Norma is a must pull for the upcoming patches, the answer is likely no, as Pyrois and other suitable crit DPS are good with Dialyn or other limited stunners, though you technically do gain an advantage from having Norma instead, but this might not necessarily be justifiable for the cost. Finally, if you're more casual, new, or free to play, here's what's actually very important for you to consider. Zenless is a game where having multiple teams is incredibly important, as you're constantly pit against multiple bosses and you're locked out of certain lineups after using them once during an endgame fight. As a result, if you're looking to finally clear in endgame mode and have picked up characters like Ye Guang, Valina, and now need a third team in order to clear Shiyu defense or Deadly Assault, Norma is definitely worth considering, especially since you could run something like Ye Guang and any support basically as your first team, Valina plus Grace or Piper or any anomaly for your second team, and finally Pyrois, Norma, and your choice of third fill support as your final team, leaving you with a pretty good chance of clearing the current endgame, with each of these teams being quite strong at least for the existing endgame if your goal is to at least get S rank clears. That's it for all you need to know about Norma and her partners though. Thanks again for watching. As a reminder, I've recently opened up a Patreon if you'd like to pre-farm or learn more about these characters ahead of time. Stay safe, stay healthy, good night.